Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. How are you doing this
morning.
morning? It's Monday, heading into September, so we'll be in Colorado. We'll start to experience some cooling of weather. When does that happen for you guys up there in New Hampshire?
It starts, the evenings are already starting to cool a little bit. And so we are seeing that downtrend, but September is a free for all out here. You never quite know what you're going to get. But as it comes, I got to say, I get more and more excited to have the sweatshirts on and to have the bonfires. And that's when in the summertime, a lot of times we don't do our outdoor movie nights, but in the fall, we're all about sitting outside and doing an outdoor movie in the backyard and just
Nice.
enjoying the crispness of the fall.
Yeah.
So looking forward to it, honestly.
In Colorado, the beautiful thing here is that the fall colors, they start about the third week of September up at the high levels of the mountains.
Right.
And it's what's called here peak.
Yep.
So all the colors are vibrant, and most of the trees are changed. And so we in Colorado, and Lynn and I do this, we go up there and we experience it, and we basically follow it week after week after week down the mountain.
Oh, nice.
So it starts about the third week of September, and it ends about the first or second week in November at our house.
Oh, really?
So we'll be able to have we have fall.
That's a long transition.
That's
that's much longer than our transition.
Yeah, because your elevation isn't as high. So you have a compressed season. Our season.
Right.
So like for example, in October when we're down the mountain, what was peak up in the high country,
right,
is all the leaves are gone already.
Right.
So all we do is go to the place where there's peak. So
right. Well, we'll get second half of September, you'll start to see, little pockets of change. Even actually, there's one tree in our backyard that always goes early, and we're already seeing a couple leaves on it, but you won't really see any of that till mid-September, and then it kind of starts. But then those first 2 weeks of October up here are stunning.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Just absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Yep. And
but then ours, a storm comes through and we're done.
Yep.
So
we're coming up to October, New Hampshire, to do our retreats, and
exactly looking forward to it.
As we shared with Scott and Kristen last week, we're gonna try to get them to open up their lake house for us, so we all get to see that.
That'll be fun, right?
Yeah. Well, we've this is kind of a special session. We've been talking about discerning God's will, and what has come up that's now more prevalent is this issue of the vaccine. And it's interesting enough, it's sticky and tricky and different than everything else we've ever had, so that there's vaccines have been, here for my whole lifetime.
Right.
And there never was a discussion about should you or shouldn't you take the vaccine. Once in a while people would say, what happened with you as a kid? Did you ever take the polio vaccine? Yeah, sure, I took the polio vaccine. And there's been over the last, probably 10 or 15 years, concern about so many vaccines for children.
Right.
And so a lot
of an anti-vax movement.
Anti-vax and or limited vax of, I'm not so sure about the speed at which you give it or the quantity that you give it. So we've all been, okay, what is your decision, choice? And it's never been a problem. Well, because of the way the government has portrayed the virus, the vaccine has taken on a different position. on two levels. One is it's that if you don't take the vaccine, that you're harming society. And then what they're trying to do with it is that we're going to force you to realize a consequence if you don't take the vaccine. So now there's a vaccine passport, like for example in New York City.
New York City, right? And a few other cities are already talking about it. A few other cities.
Well. Yeah. And that is that literally, if you haven't taken the vaccine and can't prove you've taken the vaccine, you cannot enter into this space. And basically your life, your social life in New York is shut down. So interesting consequence to that. Well, as a result of that, Christians are on every side of that and causing a lot of division, a lot of consternation, a lot of, well, if you say I should, I guess I should, even though I don't think I'd like to. And so they're defaulting to either somebody else's opinion of it and or deciding I'm not doing it, that's it.
Right. Or sitting in so much anxiety over hearing so many differing things coming at them from all directions that they don't know what to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I may have a negative consequence, which there are people that, for example, work for universities that I know that I'm working with actually right now. At the moment, it's not official, but they could have a consequence where you can't work here anymore.
Right.
Well, that's loss of income. And am I willing to trust that given that I need income? So
right. And we're seeing that in several companies. And in fact, it did come down that the military is going to be required now to vaccine as well.
That's where they're headed with that.
Another
issue that is coming up, and this is parallel, so we'll talk about them together, is because of the church is shut down, a lot of bodies, groups, fellowships, small groups started new churches or are considering starting new churches. But they're coming out of another body. So the question is, should we proceed? If they open back up, should we go back? I don't like what they've done, and so I'm going to do this because I don't like what they've done. What's the motivation? What's my viewpoint toward people that I know in the church that are not happy with me starting a church? How do I do all that?
Right.
It's kind of interesting enough. It's kind of the same thing that we're going to have to deal through. And the reason we want to deal with this specifically about the vaccine, it's not alone to say, well, this is exactly the answer for the vaccine. It's rather, as interesting enough, as life gets more chaotic and new things come up that I've never had to deal with. Like, I used to be going to this church and everything seemed to be fine. And now I'm looking at a new church startup or a new body, and how do I handle that? And I've got friendships on both sides of that. How do I handle this vaccine issue, both for my personal choice, and then secondly, how do I handle people that don't agree with me?
Right.
And the consequences of that's going to happen for me. And then third is, how could I assist others to seek God's will in the process? And so what we're going to go through is we'd really urge you to take good notes. And then realize to process through this, because it's going to come up more and more and more and more and more.
Right. And more and more issues. These happen to be two of the ones we're seeing right now.
They're just two right now that we can relate to, and then you can apply them in the future. So let's go ahead and start. The first one is, remember the premise is there's a difficult issue. It seems to be impacting more than just me personally. I need to know the three things that we're going to deal with. How do I make a decision? How do I handle the consequences of that decision that is maybe coming as a result of my decision?
Right.
And then third is, how do I work with other people that disagree, and how do I help them to see God's will in light of the fact that they may be disagreeing with me, but that in a sense shouldn't matter if we're both seeking God's will, or what if they
Right.
don't. And so it'll be, we'll cover all that. So let's start with, first of all, James 1, 5 to 8, which is where we start the process. So James 1, 5 to 8.
If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double minded man, unstable in all his ways.
Yeah. So by definition, these sticky wickets, we don't know the answer.
Right.
We can't come to a conclusion about it because a couple of reasons. One is it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's new. I've never faced this before. And I know by definition, if I approach this with my flesh, I'm going to look at it completely in the natural and with logic. As opposed to, God says, well, why don't you ask me? Because why? Well, I know the answer.
Right.
And there's nothing too difficult for me, so that this doesn't surprise me. It doesn't throw me for a loop. I know the answer, and my job is to get you the answer.
Right.
He said, so to begin with, first of all, have a heart to say, I don't know it, and I can go to God to get it. He said, you gotta kind of have that heart. If you've already decided,
which takes some humility as well as willingness to go to neutral and get out of your own way.
Okay, so describe what that means. Go to humility, get out of your own way, go to neutral. What does that mean?
Well, talking about the humility side, it's a hard thing for a lot of us because we consider ourselves smart, well-educated, well-researched on these things, and we assume we know an answer. And so just stepping back and recognizing that the God of the universe knows more than we do.
Yeah.
And so it's worthy of asking him.
Yeah.
So there's a starting point in humility, and the neutral is really, I personally got a correction when we were determining, okay, God, asking him, what are we to do? And he corrected my heart, and he's like, do you realize that your definition of neutral at this moment is, I'm not going to get it unless you tell me otherwise. And he's like, that's not neutral, Kathy. Neutral is, what do you want me to do, God? What do you have to say?
Right.
And then that can go wherever I take you. But your definition of neutral was not neutral.
Right.
And I'm like, oof, okay,
Right.
yeah, I see it. But it took him showing me that I wasn't coming at it from neutral to begin with in the process. So I had to correct my heart before I could even really start seeking the wisdom.
Right. Right. And a lot of people ask binary questions with, I believe I should.
Yes.
I am interested in, should I or should I not? And let me know if what I think is right isn't right.
Right.
And God says, well, why don't you ask me just what do I have to say about it, and let me guide you and lead you through it.
Right.
I'll get you your answer, but have a neutral heart. And interesting enough, the biblical definition of humility is really interesting. When I say to somebody, are you humble? They generally take that as, do I consider myself to be worth less? And am I willing to do whatever anybody else wants me to do? And isn't that a good thing?
Right. And that's not humility.
No. The biblical definition of humility is, and it says, by the way, Moses was one of the most humble on earth. And he wasn't a wallflower. He wasn't a passive whatever. The definition is willing to go to agreement with God.
Yes.
I'm willing to go to agreement with God which implies a couple things. And you said it. I've got my ego will out of the way. I want to seek God's will, and I'm willing to surrender my will to His truly with neutrality to get his answer, knowing that my process is to walk into his answer because it's best and none better, and I have a humility about that. Interesting enough, when you discover God's will, in a sense, your whole demeanor changes.
Yes.
I saw it. I received it. Now he says, now go with great confidence. It's going to happen. You step with me. It's going to happen. Speak it, believe it, move forward. Don't look back. Don't be hesitant. Go with confidence. It's an interesting thing.
And even that's not, the confidence is not in yourself. The confidence is in what God has spoken.
Exactly.
And so those are two different things.
And he's going to fulfill it. Yeah. So he says, okay, you lack wisdom. He says, well, the simple thing is, why don't you ask me? And if you ask me, I'll tell you.
Right.
And he says there, I'll tell you generously or liberally. The word there is with great clarity. I'll lead you with clarity to your answer. Ask me. He said, but the key is you got to believe I'm going to get you the answer. That is one thing to settle as you approach this. So as I'm looking at the vaccine, or I'm looking at this church that I'm involved in, or going to get involved in, he says, if you ask me the question, what do you got to say about this? You got to believe, settle, I'll get you the answer. If you say, I'm not sure I'll get it, I doubt if I'll get it, what if I don't get it? He says, I'm not going to bother telling you, because you're double-minded. And the double-mindedness, interesting enough, the picture there is the picture, in a sense, of a washing machine, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Interesting.
You're not settled so that you can receive it, because when I say it to you, you have to receive it and know that I'm the one giving it to you. And that if I didn't give it to you, wow, I just had my lights change here. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Let me, I got a little device here that should handle this. Hold on. So he says you got to trust me that whoa, all went out now. There we go.
Had a windy day there.
Yeah, a lot of wind inside. The Holy Spirit just took over the whole place. So as we experience that, he says, if you're still evaluating whether I'm telling you, because you're still trying to decide in the flesh, then I can't tell you. You got to get it settled. I'm going to tell you. Now, this is cool. That as he does that, he says, my burden, Christ speaking, God speaking, is to get you the answer in a way you can receive it.
Right. And he knows how we receive things too. He knows what will pique our interest and how we hear him best.
Right. So what you do at this point is you write down the issue in your journal. I have a question about whether or not what do you have to say about me taking the vaccine, or what do you have to say about this startup church that I'm part of? What would you have to say about that? And you write that down, and you say, I'm going to ask you, and I expect an answer. Okay, so that's where you start. All right, go to Matthew 10, 34 to 38.
Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me.
Okay. So Christ is making an interesting statement here. As you're pursuing wisdom, what did he basically just say to you?
That his is above all. It's we're looking to him above any other authority or any other sense of approval. Yet a lot of times we tend to go to the approval of those around us.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's saying that if you're going to be worthy,
Mhm.
you have to completely follow me,
Mhm.
which is what? I'll receive your answer for me. Okay, remember it's you.
Right.
So as you even are processing it, and we'll get to the joy of unity and how that works, but your first discussion is you personally with God
Mhm.
to say, what would you say that I can hear about this issue from you with a heart to follow? And
Right.
he says, I may tell you something that somebody else will find offensive.
Mhm.
Offensive in that I don't agree with you.
Right.
And therefore, it could create conflict.
Mhm.
He says, let it go. That's okay. I haven't come, and he says this really interesting. I haven't come to make so your relationships are all in at peace.
Mhm.
He says, I've come to lead you into truth. And by the way, best and none better. Why? I'm going to bless you to make you a blessing. I'm going to give you life and give it to you super abundantly. So he says all of that's true, and it's tricky because because you're in a difficult world,
Mhm.
and we're experiencing that more and more and more with COVID and with the government's reaction to COVID and what they're requiring us to do or not do. Well, that's a difficult place. Um,
Mhm.
like the person in New York, and we're going to get to this. They said you can't enter a social place without a vaccine.
Right.
Well, there's a consequence to that. So you could conclude, I guess, my life, if I choose not to take the vaccine, or I feel God's leading me not to take the vaccine, I guess my life is going to be crummy.
Mhm.
And God says, well, why'd you say that?
Right.
Well, because I can't go to a restaurant. I can't. He says, well, what if I gave you a different way of having joyful, exceptional life? Are you willing to believe that? Are you willing to let me
Right.
show you that? Which, by the way, including you might need to move. Might be the time to move. Uh, what's the answer? What's the answer? And
Yeah, and this is what you talk about when you say it's not so binary. It's,
right,
that there's a lot more to question in all of that and allow him to lead because his solutions and his provision is much different than what we necessarily see.
yeah. And so he says, always seek me. Process to until you get clarity.
Mhm.
If it causes problems, that's okay. I can handle that, and I'm going to help you
Mhm.
handle it. But don't let the desire. I don't want to ever have a problem with anybody. I never want to be in
Mhm.
conflict with anybody. He said even your closest people around you. He's talking about your family,
Right.
which you don't want to be in conflict with anybody in your family. Well, I guess I should just I should agree with them, or I guess I should just avoid the truth so that they're happy. And God said, well, as I'm going to give you my answer, what do I say? You got to believe it. You got to process it. You got to
Mhm.
receive it and get confirmation. Which we'll talk about. Okay. Uh, so we seek God and trust God, and it's okay that if we have a difference of opinion. Okay, now let's see about what he says. He talks about authority. Go to Romans 13 and read verses 1 to 7.
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resist what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed.
And keep going. Oh, that's it, right?
Oh,
That's the end of
that's
it.
it.
Yep.
That
Okay.
should be 7. Yep.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I got it. I had two of them at the same time. So as you understood that, he said, well, there is governance throughout the world, and the structures are natural and ordained, by God as a way to, bring about order and understanding, and you are going to wind up under those authorities.
Right.
So that as you look at it, and by the way, this is cool. This is a by the way. When everything is done, Christ returns at the end of the millennium. He destroys our earth and creates a new heaven and a new earth. Guess what he says? In that new place, now into eternity, after Satan's gone, everybody is a believer, following God, walking with God at the Holy Spirit, and they're in their resurrected bodies. He says there's going to be nations and organizations and businesses with authority. So it's an interesting God-ordained structure that he's setting up the premise here that fundamentally, and we'll talk about that it's not, again, universal or always, but he's setting up the fundamental approach is what the law says, what the ruler says, is in essence conform to that. Don't fight against it. Don't try to you decide you shouldn't do something because you don't like it. It's okay. Now that that's true, what would you have me do now? So that, for example, if you're in New York City today, and we'll get to the decision, but let's assume you've made the decision. I believe God said, no, don't take the vaccine. Well, if you live in New York City, the rulers, the authorities have said, then you can't go into a restaurant. You can't go to a show. You can't go to an event. You can't go into a social environment. God doesn't say, well, go fight against that. He would say, all right, let me show you now my answer to you in that situation, knowing that that's what the authorities have said. And look at it this way. The focus is more toward following God as opposed to, I think I should fight, argue, and come against this. Now, by the way, God could tell you, go to your mayor and appeal to him. That's an answer. That's okay. It's not that you don't are not active in things, but it's don't spend all of your energy fighting against the rulers. He basically says,
and even go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, even in that, surrendering your heart in asking him for that, am I going to the authorities and standing up for this because God is calling me to step in for such a time as this and to speak to this? Or am I going in out of fear of losing what I think is important and actually maybe what is even potentially an idol in my life?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll give you
so there's some hard issues there to examine with him.
Give you a great example of that. Wilberforce was a legislator in the Parliament at England. This back in the 1800s, and he was convicted by God that I want you to speak against the slave trade and what they were doing as an authority, because they were promoting the slave trade. I'm asking you to come against it. And he really had to seek God's will. And there's a great movie about this, by the way. He struggled with, but I'm nobody. There's no way I can see this affecting. And shouldn't I just focus on how I live within that thing? He said, well, I'm calling you to speak against it. And so and by the way, he started to, got a lot of resistance. He actually wanted to quit. But he had a body, a community around him. And they gathered and, okay, what's God's will? And they confirmed, hey, stay with it. Stay with it. Now, by the way, and this is cool, he didn't come at it by attacking the other legislators.
Right.
God kept telling him, do it with honor and respect. Just keep speaking the truth. Keep speaking the truth. Bring people with you, that can speak the truth. And so, by the way, he brings Newton, who was a slave trader. And he got converted and realized that what he was doing was wrong. And he wrote fantastic songs that we sing as hymns right today. Well, he was a slave trader, got converted, understood it. Well, Wilberforce got linked up with him and said, you need to come and share your story. And by the way, it's about God. See, it was about God. God said.
Right.
God said. So he actually stayed with it, and it was many, many, many years, and they took the vote and lost, took the vote and lost, took the vote and lost. Stay with it. Stay with it. With honor and respect.
Honor and respect, that's a big part.
And the cool thing was that as he then wound up at a place where they agreed with him, and they said, okay, this is it. We're going to stop it. And we're going to rule against it. Everybody said through the whole thing, we always respected you. We didn't agree with you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We didn't agree with you.
But could still respect it.
But we respected you because you respected us. And we saw the truth now. We see the truth now. So it's not that God can't use you and or people you're involved with in a healthy, respectful way to say, well, I'd like you to actually work against what the government has said because it's not right. Let me show you the way. But the fundamental premise is I'm asking you to follow the law of the land and don't fight against it per se. There'll be situations. We're going to talk at situations here.
Right.
But follow, what the law of the land is. Okay. He says something more about this. Go to Matthew 22, 15 to 22. And he adds to this. Go ahead and read that.
Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius, and Jesus said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away.
Okay. So he's taken this a little bit further. Well, are you supposed to follow the authorities or not? He's asked a question. By the way, they're trying to trap him.
Right.
And he said, well, give me this coin. Whose inscription is the Caesar's? He says, okay, render unto the authority what is due the authority, and render unto God what is God's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, huh. So he just added an element of our decision making and our receiving God's will, is that there's going to be situations that it's appropriate to do what the government says or what the authority says. There's other times when I'm going to give you a higher order, which goes back to Matthew 10. Let it be conflicting with those around you, but
Right.
I'm going to ask you to do something that doesn't surrender to that authority.
Right.
'Cause
And we're seeing that example in Daniel
Yes.
with the food and all of that, right? In the
Yeah.
book of Daniel.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. My instruction is going to be from me, purely from me, and I might give you something that is opposite of the authority. And by definition, don't follow the authority, follow me, because it's going to be in conflict.
Right.
And there may, by the way, be consequences that you got to trust me for. So, and you mentioned Daniel. So Daniel's a great example. So he was captured by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylonia, taken to Iraq, basically, Babylonia, under a completely different system. So they couldn't go to temple. They had to learn all the education of the Babylonia. You got to follow the ruler, the king, and what he says is true. And fundamentally, Daniel, I understand that. I will change what I think. Do I want to follow this guy? No. Do I think anything that he says is good? No, I don't think so at all. But he's my authority, so I'm going to surrender to that authority. Okay. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Well, then he says, well, by the way, you got to eat meat to idols. That was given to idols. And Daniel says, I can't do that. Why? Well, because God says no.
Right.
Yeah, they say so, but I say no. You can't violate what I've said to you. Okay, well, I'm not doing it. And then he had to go through that, and he came up with, okay, well, how do I handle this? And God says, well, why don't you have him do a test? And don't eat for 10 days and see how you come out. See if you're healthier than the rest of them. If you're healthy as the rest of them, then they should let you do it. Okay, let me try that. So he gives that, and they find out he's healthier, and they said, okay, fine, you don't have to. They exempted him.
And I love even that description that you just gave. God gave them a very specific to that situation answer for that question and an instruction to follow in that. And I love how he meets us right in that place. And that's not something they necessarily would have thought of on their own.
No.
Or they could have just as easily said, no, we're not allowed to do that, and stamp their foot and throw a tantrum.
That's it. And that's it. And I'm taking the consequences.
And there's no respect or honor in that. Yet what God gave them to do and present was with respect and honor.
Next one is, and by the way, these tests that Daniel has, it's over a 70-year period. We tend to think it all happened the first couple of weeks, and he passed them all, and it wasn't that great. It was over,
because it was only a few books in the Bible, so it must have been quick, right?
Yeah, a few chapters. It was only a few chapters.
Right, few chapters. Yeah.
So it was over 70 years and actually 4 different kings. But the second one with Nebuchadnezzar was he has a dream. And he gathers what he calls his men of wisdom, which Daniel by this time has become one of those guys. He's just part of a group of guys. And he calls his leaders of that group and says, I've had a dream. Tell me the interpretation. So they say, well, tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation. He said, no, if you're that wise, you tell me that what I dreamt and you tell me the interpretation. We can't do that. They said, okay, I'm going to kill everybody. Your entire group, I'm going to kill. Well, that's an interesting authority. Well, Daniel's part of that group. So he's therefore going to get killed. So he says to God, what do you have to say about this? And God says, go to him and tell him you'll do what he asks.
Mm-hmm.
And so Daniel, again, is, as he processed, so you're God telling me that you're going to tell me what he dreamt and give me the interpretation of what he dreamt, and I can confidently go tell him that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. He goes, look, before you kill us all, how about if I spend a little bit of time with my God, and I'll answer what you've requested, and let me come back in a day or two and let me do that. Okay, I'll give you a couple days. Before I kill everybody, I'll give you a couple days. Okay, so
right.
God gives him the dream and the interpretation of the dream. And Daniel makes a statement that he says, I want everybody to know, none of this has been given to me because I'm any good.
Right.
He says, I'm not skilled at this. I'm not somebody special. I just asked God.
Right.
And God gave me the answer, and he gave me not only the answer, what to do, but then he fulfilled what he said he's going to do.
Right. And that description you just gave is that perfect illustration of humility before God.
Yeah, absolutely.
And confidence. Then going to the king and saying, I will be able to do this for you because God said he's going to give it to me.
That's right.
So
then he got released, and hey, thank you. And he didn't kill the guys, including Daniel and his friends. Okay, the next time, the king has been persuaded to build basically a idol totem that's 80 feet high, and everybody has to worship him. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel implied there, although he wasn't specifically involved in this one scenario. What do you got to say about that? No.
Right.
You can't do it. God, there's a consequence to this. If we don't do this, we're getting thrown in the fire.
Right.
And we're dead. We're dead. We're going to die. God says, yeah, I know. Trust me. Don't do this. I'm telling you, no, do not do this. Okay. And they make the statement. Nope, we can't do it. You said to do it. And we're trying to describe the authority issue.
Right.
The authority says this, but God says, sorry, no. In this case, I am saying do not follow what the authority says. Yeah, but there's a consequence to that. It's okay. Let me get you through that. I'll show you through it. And they make a statement. God said no. We trust him completely. And even if we die because of this consequence, we're good with it. Right. We trust God completely. And hey, if we're going to go be home with him, we're going home. They get thrown in the fire. 3 of them, what do they see in there? 4 people.
An angel, yes.
They saw Jesus. They probably saw Jesus in there. They saw 4 people in there. They don't have one thing happen to them. And I don't know if you've been around fire, but if you get, I've been close to a fire,
right,
where it singed my eyebrows, and it smelled. You could smell it. Well, they were in the fire, which was heated up multi times hotter, so they would make sure they got killed. They come out and there wasn't a single singe anywhere on their body, and it didn't smell.
Amazing, right?
God completely protected them, and Nebuchadnezzar says, "Oh, look at this. Okay, from now on, everyone just you don't have to worship me. Actually, worship Daniel's God, because obviously, he's done something else. The lion, that you gotta stop praying publicly. By the way, Daniel could have said, okay, the consequence is death. So God, I think the best way to handle this is I'll just go and pray privately. I'm not going to do this publicly anymore. I'm going to do it privately. Isn't that okay? And God says, no, it's not okay. You keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
You violate what they've said, and you just stay with me. And I want you publicly to do it. Okay. Daniel does it. They said, okay, that's it. They throw him in the lion's den.
Mm-hmm.
Well, normally he's going to get killed. And by the way,
Right.
he was willing to go to that. This is what we're trying to set up here. Is in all these scenarios, there were always negative consequences.
Right.
They didn't change what they heard God say because of the
Mm-hmm.
negative consequence.
Exactly.
It was, what would you say to me, even though it violates an authority that has said you should.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that means that our real authority isn't the government. Generally speaking, yep, follow what they say. But there's going to be times when I'm going to tell you differently and you follow
Mm-hmm.
me. And don't let the government authority alter your decision of what I'm speaking to you, so that, like, for example, we got two examples here. The COVID or the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, and I'm hearing this, is I don't think I'm supposed to take it, but there's a negative consequence to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, I guess I should take it so to avoid the negative consequence.
Mm.
And God is saying, no, stop. Don't even think about the negative consequence to start with.
Right.
What do I have to say to you about my instruction for you, my will for you? Get that settled.
Right.
And then we'll go deal with the negative consequence. I'll show you what to do about that, including, and they were all in that same place. If I actually experience this, I'm okay with it.
Right.
Okay.
And that goes on both sides, wherever his instruction lands. If he's instructing you to, say, get the vaccine, and you're like, but I see all this research of all these negative consequences. If his instruction is best, none better, you go regardless of the consequence.
Exactly.
You
So
know,
that you
on
don't,
either side.
on either side. So you don't let the group think,
Yes.
whether it's the authority or the people in your church. Same thing with starting a new church. And this is true all the time, is that if you're a member of a church and you say, I'm going to go start a new church, they're going to tell you, no, you stay here.
Right.
You be part of this. Well, generally speaking, again, on major, most issues of the church, you're going to say, okay, but your question is to God, well, what would you say about this?
Mm-hmm.
And see, God may say to you, no, I want you to leave that church and go ahead and start a new. I'll give you a perfect example. Linda and I were in Boulder, Colorado, attending a large, actually one of the largest churches in Colorado, which we enjoyed. We loved it. And the preacher was a biblical preacher, and it was fun. Well, they didn't have a young marriage class, so Linda and I started a young marriage class, which they sanctioned. And we went from 0 kids to 50 couples. We had 100 people.
Wow.
And all we're doing is teaching them the Word of God and how to live out life. And they were excited about it. It was vibrant. But we noticed something. None of those kids are going to church. So I said, hey, why aren't you going to church? You need to be worshiping. You need to go to church.
Right.
We don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? It's organ music and choirs. We've been exposed to some contemporary worship. That's what we would really like to do, and it's too boring for us. I said, oh, okay. I said, if they had that, would you go? Oh, yeah, sure. So I go to the pastor and said, look, I got 100 kids. You have 3 services. Take one of those services and convert it to a contemporary service. And I said, interesting enough, in my class are musicians, and they'll do it.
Right.
And you just preach what you're going to preach, tell us what you're doing, and we'll build the worship service around that. And all you got to do is convert one of them. And by the way, it was in a university town, University of Colorado. I said,
so it had potential to draw so many.
I said, if you do this, you'll be the hit of Boulder. You'll be the hit of Colorado. No. we're not doing it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we're not changing it, and we don't care, and we're not going to do it. So tell them, everybody, no, they got to come to church. That's it. Uh, so I go back to the class and said, they're not willing to consider that. That's the authority we're under. What do you got to say about that? Let's go to God, see what he has to say about that. So we go to God, and God says, I'd like you to consider breaking off and starting a new church.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, okay, we'll consider that. So we pray, and our prayer was this: God, send somebody to come. If they come and we see it, we'll start it and join it, and we'll be willing to go. And even some of the discussion then was, yeah, but the church told us we couldn't go. I said, well, there's two fundamental things about the church issue. One is there's a freedom that we have, that this is not the church, it's a church.
Right.
So we could have the freedom to go elsewhere if we feel led to. And then secondly, God said, consider it.
Right.
So we have to
we've
follow.
got to listen to God on
and
that.
It's going to, and I'm going to tell you guys right now, there's going to be conflict with this. But that's okay. God will show us the way. So, so we pray. It's like 6-7 months. And they walk into our session and say, we heard God said it's you and Linda. And I said, what? I got a business. I'm in business. I didn't hear that. And they said, well, you said to go seek God, and that's what we're hearing. You got to go seek God. And so we do. And so what I say is, well, God, if this is true, then show me the way and bring people around me. I said, not these people, because none of them have started a church. So bring people that know what they're doing. And if you do, then I'll join it, And so literally 1 month later, we're sitting in my living room with 20 people that moved from out of state to Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, that all have started churches.
Wow.
And they, through people sharing, hey, we're thinking about, okay, we'd like to talk to you about that. They all in my living room saying, we know how to do this. We understand the process. We understand about abiding. Let's go. I said, okay, when do you want to do this? They said, let's start next week.
Wow.
And we literally started next week, the following week. And I went to the pastor, and I told him, I said, I'm going to let you know that we are starting a new church. It's going to be a contemporary church. We're dinky, we're small, we're nobody. I doubt if it'll impact your church much. And we would like you to bless us. And they actually have formally sent me a letter saying, we will not bless you.
Wow.
And we oppose what you're doing. So we went to God and said, are we supposed to surrender to that, try to bring it under that? And he said, nope. I've called you to something new. Now, he said this is really critical, and we'll get into this. You just go do what you're going to do, and you don't need to even talk about your church at all. So don't tell them, well, they said, and they aren't, and they're bad, and they're this or that.
Right.
It's just go follow me, and you bless them by supporting them verbally. Obviously not supporting them by staying there, but you're going to go. So, and I'll tell the rest of the story actually tomorrow. But it's exactly what the situation we're talking about with people who are looking at starting new churches or part of new churches or new bodies, that there's no universal answer. Just like the vaccine, we're trying to say there's no universal answer. You tend to be under authority, generally speaking, follow that. But higher than that is render unto God what's God's.
Right.
And what does that mean? Well, what do you have to say, and what are you up to that you want me to join, even though it may cause conflict? And by the way, be opposite of the authority that you put me under.
Right.
And that's where the clarity has to come. not because I'm mad.
Mm-hmm.
If I went and started a church because, well, I'm mad at those guys, I'm going to do it anyway, but I didn't hear that from God,
Right.
it's going to fall right on his face.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to be in turmoil about it because I'm not following God. I'm not in peace. I'm doing it out of anger. I'm doing it out of hostility or judgment. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow. If you have questions as we're starting to raise up, send them in, and we'll pick them up and talk about them. We're going to continue this discussion tomorrow, and there's lots more to process. So
Yes,
so
absolutely.
stay tuned and come on back.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
We look forward to tomorrow.
Okay, see you, Kathy.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.